The scrolls of Hayah, the fragment of the dome, visions of the deceased beings, and experimental lands. The night he met with Joel, the air seemed to hold a weight that was hard to describe, as if the darkness itself knew something forbidden was about to come to light. In that abandoned farm, wrapped in fog and silence, Joel appeared carrying years of secrets he was finally ready to unload. His first sentence was like a gunshot. "They lied to us. Everything was a lie." And so he began to reveal a world that existed between invisible lines, a world where Antarctica was not just ice, but a vibrant, dangerous frontier full of zones where the rules of reality broke apart. He spoke of the Zone of the Dead, a line within the Antarctic Circle where time, mind, and matter seemed to crack. Sailors who crossed that region saw impossible visions, fragments of the future, the past, or other dimensions. Some lost their sanity. Others returned with an empty stare, as if they had seen something no human being was meant to behold. Joel had been a direct witness. Ships that moved without touching the water, spheres gliding across the ice without friction, lights descending from the sky like silent swarms. Everything reinforced the idea that Antarctica was not a natural territory, but an artificial boundary protecting something greater. But the most disturbing part was not what he had seen from afar, but what he faced while on mission, the experimental lands. These were islands that appeared and disappeared from official maps, created or modified by the custodians. There, soldiers were forced to fight against giant beings, genetically altered Patagonians, false descendants of the true giants. They were creatures in a state of torpor, used as targets in a perverse game where humans and monsters alike were sacrificial pieces. Joel's voice broke with every word. He had seen horrors that marked him forever. Things grew darker when he recalled his 5 missing days in the middle of the Antarctic Sea after encountering an impossible object. A dark ship that did not touch the water, gliding forward like a living shadow, passing through his vessel as if it didn't exist. The entire crew collapsed to the floor, overwhelmed by nausea, visions, and the sensation of separating from their own bodies. Joel remembered seeing himself from above, floating over his own body, while the sea opened up into scenes of fire, screaming souls, hooded figures, and messages from unknown entities. Some saw deceased relatives. Others saw hostile presences. It was as though consciousness had been torn out and carried into another plane for endless seconds. From that traumatic encounter came an even more unsettling revelation. The crew had seen fragments of death, messages from beings that did not belong to this plane, and warnings of something approaching. And while military doctors tried to cover everything with empty diagnoses, Joel understood that these experiences were not hallucinations. They were being used as instruments in a game of access to dimensions the custodians had been manipulating for centuries. Then came the puzzle piece that changed everything: the fragment of the dome. Retrieved in the 1950s and studied in secret, that piece seemed to project images, colors, scenes, and patterns that should not exist. It was not crystal, not metal, not stone. It was active technology, a fragment of the very mechanism covering the known lands. When they studied it, an entire region of Antarctica trembled, as if something gigantic beneath the surface had been disturbed. That was the first time Joel understood that the skies, the lights, and the stars might be part of a projection far more complex than anyone had imagined. But nothing shook him as much as the documents that spoke of Tartaria. Of real giants walking among humans, of shining cities under electrical storms that fed crystal towers, of free energy, of long lives, of harmony between races, and of how that world had been systematically destroyed by the custodians. The dossier the captain handed him, a silent hero who paid with his life for sharing the truth, described an immense empire, a glorious past erased down to the last letter. Then came the forbidden texts, the scrolls of Hayah. Hayah, the child found in a temple during a storm, able to speak with a sphere of light that hovered over his shoulder. Hayah, the young man who taught that truth was not in the projected sky, but within the human soul. Hayah, who said the ice walls were not placed there by the creator, but by the colonizers. Who repeated that humanity was not small, but infinite. Who spoke of Asgard, of the first humanity, of the source. Who was persecuted, imprisoned, disappeared, and later seen in places where he should not have existed. Joel had found incomplete fragments, but enough to understand that Hayah had been a spiritual threat, not a political one. A living reminder of what humans had been before the reset. A bridge between worlds. The end of the story grew even darker. The captain who had guided him was murdered. Joel was framed, hunted, harassed in frozen sub-levels of clandestine bases, until he decided to escape in the midst of a brutal storm to recover the documents Charlie had protected with his life. And in that desperate escape, he discovered something no one expected. A map with a new name written by hand. Morris Strait. A direct connection to William Morris. A hidden passage. A path that should never have been discovered. Joel finished his account with a distant stare, as if he could still hear the echo of that dark ship passing through his vessel. He said that everything he had seen led to a single truth. Death is not an end. The lands do not end at the ice. The dome is not a sky. And humanity is living inside a deception built to prevent its spiritual awakening. His last sentence before putting out his cigarette was almost a whisper. Everything you saw, Claudio, everything you saw on your journeys is real, and what comes next will be even greater.